Hey there, it's Dan Kenner with episode number 101 of the podcast. Today is Monday, December 11th, 2023, as I record this, and we're talking to Tim Facciola about him writing his novel, his fantasy trilogy, for 10 years, and the process of writing and discovering and getting better and developing it to get to a place where he could begin publishing it. So we talk a lot about development and all of his learning in the crafting of the actual story and some of the challenges that come with writing a story for so long. So you want to stick around for that part of the conversation. This week, in terms of updates, I don't have a lot of updates on the homestead front. Everything has been relatively stable for the most part, just keeping the goats happy and alive as well as the chickens. We are getting a significant number of eggs, which is a great and welcome change to where we were just a little over a month ago, where we were getting virtually none. A couple of the changes that we made was we actually got a dedicated flock of egg layers. So the chickens we had prior to this we do have some of them still. We're kind of hybrid. They got a little bit bigger, so they were kind of near the meat size, and they laid, a medium amount of eggs. So I think that was part of it. We just switched breeds. We got strict egg layer breeds, which is helping because they lay more eggs per year. But then, yeah, getting rid of those roosters definitely did help. So we're getting anywhere from 7 to 9 eggs a day, and that's not enough. Still. So with our family of 8, we eat a lot of eggs. Eggs are usually the easy go-to for meals. We use them in our baking and our cooking and all sorts of things. So eggs are just really important in this family. So we're grateful to be getting this many. We'd love to see more around 13 to 15 a day where possible, but we're not complaining. This is excellent. We're actually getting eggs, and maybe at some point we'll be able to build up. So one thing we do with our extra eggs, if we ever get to that phase during the winter, obviously they're not going to lay as many, but when they start laying more in the springtime and summertime, we actually store those eggs for a rainy day, essentially. So we water glass them. We tried freeze drying them. Freeze dried eggs are not my favorite. Save that. We'll use them in a pinch. They're better than nothing, but we generally water glass them. So essentially, you get some pickling lime. It's just I don't even know what it is, honestly. It's just a chemical of some sort that you put in water, and then you submerge them in the water, the eggs, and because they have that bloom from when the egg chickens lay their eggs, as long as they're clean, the bloom will kind of protect the insides. So when you drop them in, that bloom on the outside of the egg will protect it from anything bad from getting in. So water glassing them preserves them for, I can't remember, we had ours preserved for about 6 months to a year before we started using them. And they do have a little bit of a funky flavor. It's not terrible. They're just a little bit strange. And they're a tiny bit watery as well. But other than that, they're great. Hey, we stored probably 12 or 15 dozen eggs that way. And it was great because then when our chickens stopped laying for the winter, or laid not as many in the winter, we were able to pull those out of storage and use those. We don't generally eat those ones like scrambled eggs. You save the fresh ones for that. You just use them in like pancakes or baking or whatever, and they work just fine. But yeah, if you're interested in learning about that process, definitely let me know. Water glassing is fascinating. Kind of freaked me out at first, to be frank, but it works out great. We love to preserve as much as we can for times when the garden and the chickens aren't doing as well. Other than that, in terms of writing, I am now at about 65,000 words of Demon Blooded, which is the second book of the Hidden Heritage, making significant progress on that. I try to write about 2,000 words a day where possible. Doesn't happen every day because life is crazy, things happen. But if I can get an hour a day-ish here and there, then I'll keep moving forward with that, which is excellent. Of course, if you would like to read Dragon Blooded or The Etcher's Plight, which are completed drafts, you can get access to those early on my Ream. So it's reamstories.com/Dan Kenner if you're interested in looking into that. So we'll be publishing the chapters early there before I actually publish the book. So early access for all of those chapters, which is kind of fun. Demon Blooded will then follow right after Dragon Blooded, and then so on and so forth as I continue writing the books. In other news, I did have my writing group read Darkness Incarnate, which is the short story that I finished last week. Actually, I think it might have been the week before. I did some minor edits on it just because I didn't have a lot of time. Put it in front of my reading group, and they absolutely loved it. They said they were a little bit shocked. It's a little darker than what I normally write, not in an inappropriate way. It's just there's some kind of more depressing, darker themes to it. They said they were very surprised by the ending, and that, when they were about 7/8 of the way through it, they thought, how are you going to resolve this? There's no way that you can resolve this in a satisfying way. And then when they got to the end, they said, that is incredible that you finished it that way. I can't believe you resolved it. I'm satisfied. It was thrilling. It was adventurous, and it was short. So short by certain definitions. It's about 14,000 words. So in the document double space that I sent to them is about 47 pages. So definitely not short, but short for me. I'm really loving the short story writing exercise. I'm hoping to keep up with it maybe once a quarter as I submit it to Writers of the Future. I'm not sure how well this one will do, but I personally like it better than my last one. And the last one received a silver honorable mention. So I don't know. We'll see. I won't be necessarily disappointed if it doesn't work out, but I do think it's a little bit of a more effective and moving story than the other one. The other one was kind of purely entertainment. This one is very moving in certain ways. So anyway, if you're interested in reading that, definitely let me know. More than likely, I'll be adding it to my Ream stories or, my Ream account as well at some point. So if you want to read that story, let me know. Be happy to share that. Other than that, something that I'm planning on diving into more is the AI-generated audiobooks for the Lightbearer Chronicles. So I received an email recently that Findaway Voices, which is a distributor for audiobooks, is now accepting Google Play-generated AI audiobooks. So I need to develop those a little bit more. I would like to eventually have a human narrator for my books. That's definitely the goal. Funds wise, I need to save up for that. It's quite pricey, understandably so, because it's a lot of work. The editing process is quite intense. I've recorded the first few chapters of my first epic fantasy book and tried to edit half of it, or half of one chapter, really, just to get an idea of what the process would be like if I were to record these myself. Very heavy time, time investment. Maybe if you're really good at it, it wouldn't take as long. But due to that fact, I do not have human narrated audiobooks. For now, I do have the AI narrated versions. They're okay. I've picked 3 different voices for the different perspectives, the different POVs in those books. So I think they work. They're not perfect, like I said. So, but anyway, I would rather have something for those people who are really seeking audiobooks for my books. At least in the meantime, until I have a human narrated book, I'll take advantage of that for as long as I can. But other than that, yeah, nothing else really in terms of updates. So we can go ahead and shift over to the interview portion of the podcast. Hey, Tim, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Dan. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for joining me. Before we dive into all the fun, meaty stuff as an author, how long have you been writing and publishing?
So I started writing probably about 10 years ago. I started publishing about a year ago, like just entering into what that process is a whole nother beast.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say, that the 10,000 hour theory. The writing, I feel like, yeah, there's a lot of hours sunk into the writing. The publishing side, it's a whole other monster, and I am very much a newbie, and I feel like a newbie. And I guess there's always a childlike wonder in approaching everything with a beginner mindset. So 10 years, but I'm still a beginner.
Well, I totally understand how that is. You've been technically writing longer than myself. I think I started writing in 2018 formally,
Okay.
just based on a challenge. So let's talk about why you got into writing originally. So is this something you've always wanted to do, or was there just like a passion project that it started with?
So answer is twofold. One, if you would have asked me in high school, like, what is a bucket list thing you want to do? I would have had 3. I wanted to learn to play guitar, I
Mm.
wanted to learn how to dance, and I wanted to write a book. Um, why? I don't know. It's just like that was, I remember saying that to someone. But when I did learn to play guitar, I was in a band. The band broke up, and it was after the band broke up, and I did a lot of like the lyrics, and I wrote a lot of the songs, and I missed that creative element. And it was post college, entering the workforce. I was working like 70, 80 hours a week. I was working 6 to 7 days a week. And I was just like, my brain, when I would sleep, would just like
Hmm.
fireworks of stuff. And it was actually one of my clients who said, "Are you a creative person?" And I was like, "I don't know, I guess." Like, sure. She's like, "You probably just need a creative outlet." So I was like, "What's something easy that I can do by myself?" And I stumbled upon writing. And now I look back and go, that was the dumbest moment in my life. But yeah, I thought it was something I could do on my own. I couldn't. I thought it was something that would be easy. I couldn't. It definitely wasn't something that I picked up quickly. Um, but it very, very much so became a passion project that once I sank my teeth into, I wasn't going to let go of. So it just kind of spiraled and developed and spiraled and developed and became this huge part of my life.
Yes, I think it's funny that you I know you use quotation marks, but definitely not easy. Writing is far from easy. But I mean, I hear what you're saying. I think there's a lot of people that they have this idea that, hey, creative outlet, oh, I'll just create stories. I like telling stories. I like reading. I'll just write one down. Well, it's much easier said than done. But I'm curious to know about your journey, because writing a single series as a trilogy that you've been working on for 10 years is quite a feat. I hardly have patience to work on one trilogy for like 3 years. So I'm curious to know, what did that look like? Was this constant writing, or was it because of work that you weren't able to write as much? What was kind of that journey over that 10 years that ultimately led you to here?
Sure. So the first 3 years was the drafting of the was is the first draft. The first 3 years. That's how long it took me to even put pen to paper enough to create a first draft. Granted, that first draft was 278,000 words. Granted that I was still working an incredible amount of hours in the fitness industry. So I would maybe write a couple hours a week. Like I'm talking 2 to 3 hours a week. I'd try to get through like a chapter and a chapter a week. I didn't more often than not. That first 3 years was just the first draft. Then I was like, well, what do I do now? And I sent it off to a developmental editor. That developmental editor was like, this is great. Rewrite. Because like there were so many things I wasn't even like aware to be aware of. You know what I mean? Um, so she very much took me under her wing, and I got a lot of education on what it means to tell a story and what are the building blocks of story, and how to use this color palette and like create a painting with it. So I spent the next 2 years more invested in the craft of writing, and then kind of went back and rewrote the book. um, and the other assignment she had given me was cut it in half, because at the time my goal was traditional publishing. She's like, does anyone know your name? No, 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 my name. I'm like, okay, well, you're going to have a hard time selling a nearly 300,000 word book in today's market. And granted, this is about 5 years ago, so 2018.
Mm-hmm.
And the way the publishing industry was trending was books were getting shorter. Advances were getting smaller.
Mm-hmm.
There was a little less leash with what was working in terms of what was selling well at market. And so I was like, okay, I'll buy into that. So I cut it in half, which was a really interesting editing process. Um, and then around 2020 was when I started like actually pitching book one. Um, I think I had spent a little time in the query trenches a little before that, and then like quickly was like, I don't know how to write a query letter, and then went back and tried to figure out how do I write it. How do I like, I
Mm-hmm.
invested in the next craft, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I still didn't. That wasn't working for me. So it wasn't until um, so I queried in 2020. Hated that, among other things that happened in 2020. Um, I actually did get a traditional publishing offer. It was through I did like the virtual Writers Digest conference, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they had like a virtual pitch session. and I was so nervous for this. And well, someone ended up getting back to me at this virtual pitch session. They were interested in publishing the book. I researched the publishing company. Everything was normal, I guess. Like it was not like a predatory company, but at the same time, I just felt this like twisting, like in my gut, that like this just doesn't feel right for me. And I actually spoke with my editor about it, being like, what should I even, what, I don't even know what questions to ask. I don't even know how to approach this, this aspect of the industry. And through talking with her, I ended up deciding this isn't it for me. This isn't the way. It just didn't feel right. And at that point, I decided, okay, the big reason why that felt wrong to me was the concept of, I spent all these years writing it, and now I have a 2-year contract to get you book 2. What if I can't do it? Or what if I can't do it the way I want to do it? Or what if I do it, but I'm not happy with it, but now I'm stuck because I'm on contract. Book 3. And there were, Michael J. Sullivan he's a very popular fantasy author now, but like once upon a time, his stuff, he tried pitching it, didn't get picked up. He ended up writing the whole thing for his family. He told stories to his family, and his wife was like, "No, this is too good not to like put it out to the world." And she ended up pitching it. No, she didn't pitch.
I think it cut out there for a second. Can you hear me?
All right, I can hear you.
Perfect.
We're back.
We're back. It's all good.
How much did you? Where did I?
You were getting into someone was pitching, and then you said she didn't pitch, and then it kind of cut out about there.
Gotcha. So. But like his wife ended up being the one to like self-publish it. It did very well. It ended up getting picked up by Orbit Books, a huge publisher. And I remember reading the books, and I was like, this is good. Book 1 good, book 2 good, book 3 good, book 4 good, book 5 good, book 6. The ending slapped me so hard that I was just like, every it's littered with Easter eggs throughout. And I was just like, how did this author do it? And then I went back and learned the story, that he wrote the whole thing. Then it got published. So he went back and tweaked everything to create the ending in such a cathartic way. Like it could, if he had published book 1 and then it was like, now give us book 2, that never would have turned out the way it turned out. Once I got that in my head, I was like, I think I need to write the whole thing first before I publish any of it. And once I got fixated on that idea, I couldn't let it go. So then in 2020, beginning of 2022, I decided, okay, I'm going to write the next 2 books. And the most, obviously, like life has changed. I was telling you off air, like gym closed during the pandemic, turned virtual, much more time, no commute, much more manageable, better energy. So I was able to commit more to my writing more consistently. And I wrote the second book I outlined it in a month, and then I wrote it in 3 months. And then I did the same thing with book 3. So I wrote like 300,000 published words, like publishable words, over the course of a year, which for me was amazing, considering it took me like 3 years to write the first book. And as that was kind of coming together, it was just like, I'm now able to go back. Once I finished drafting book 3, I went back to book 1 and was like, okay, am I setting up for this the way I want to set up for it? Am I sprinkling the seeds that will eventually grow and blossom and flourish, and give the rereadability of a story? Like, I love a story that has so many details that, like, oh, I didn't pick up on this the first time through. And that's probably why I wrote a 300,000 word book in the first draft in the first place. So yeah, it's definitely been a long, not easy journey, but a very fulfilling one.
Well, it's interesting to hear because it's great to hear the context. You hear someone say they've been working on a series or books for, 10 years, but in reality, it wasn't technically, just the breakdown of it all. You wrote the second and the third book very, very quickly by nature of life changes and everything. So it's just cool. It's here to hear. It's encouraging because there's a lot of people out there like you who are maybe feeling discouraged because they've been writing this book forever. And they're like, am I ever going to finish this? Or this is supposed to be a 6-book series. I'm still only on the first book. Like, circumstances change, things change. Your strategy may change. I also didn't query because I hated it. I wrote exactly 2 query letters and I said, I don't want to waste my time on this. I just don't care. And so I just didn't. And I'm glad I didn't. Traditional publishing just isn't for me. Unless, one of my books were to get picked up after published, which I'd be fine with. But I'm not going to be writing agents. So I understand that on that front. But I'm curious to know because you're speaking to someone who dislikes the editing process significantly. I don't like editing. It is something that my brain does not handle well. It's easier for me just to pick up a new story. So how did you keep organized enough to come back through your books and make the changes to match the rest of your series once you finish 2 and 3?
So many times. So I am a very heavy plotter. So that comes, I say that first and foremost because from a structural standpoint, I struggle with drafting. Drafting's the hard part for me. And
Sure.
then the once I have that first draft, I love plotting. Drafting is work. The revision process is usually fairly easy for me because like
Mm,
I have such a clear idea of what I want to happen when I want it to happen.
sure.
So like it's like, oh, it's this scene or this sequel to that big moment. And but then like I have this trilogy has 7 point of view characters with intertwining plots. That required a very detailed chapter by chapter outline. So I have a spreadsheet, a color coded spreadsheet of
Wow.
for each book. So that made the revision process in terms of like, okay, when does this like what are the men and then it's like command F, like what is this phrase that I want to come back to? And then all right, this is the detail I need to add around that. That and then also just like a lot of rereading it, you know what I mean? So much rereading it. And I definitely like I think there's no okay. The way I describe it to new writers is you are investing the time no matter how you slice it. You're either doing it pre-draft, in draft, or post-draft.
Hmm.
Um, I I like to spend my work on the fringes. I want to do it in the beginning, I want to do it at the end. While I'm drafting, I really just want to get through it. I want to get
Mm,
through it and I want to get through it quickly as and like because it feels the most like that's where it feels like there's the most pressure to me. I don't know why. I feel like I can pop in and pop out of plotting. I can pop in and pop out of revising. But from a creative standpoint, I find it really hard to switch on and switch off that part of my brain. If
mhm.
does that make sense?
Yeah, it does
So
make sense.
the you mentioned I wanted to touch on this because you mentioned like when new authors kind of see like 10 years, oh my God, like I'm struggling to finish my first and I have this many more. Um this I had there was a person, she does webinars, she runs a like self-publishing service company. So like if you need, X, Y, or Z, whether it's a launch team or editing or book coaching to kind of help structure or actually write, yada yada yada. But anyway, her she gave me this tidbit that's been really helpful for me, and I share it with anyone who will listen because it was a real game changer. But this concept of writing an author mission statement was a like a light switch for me because for me, I had that same exact notion in my head, like there's an identity crisis of I write epic fantasy novels, but I don't have any finished. So what am I? Who am I? What is the point of this? I'm never. So then it, like that macro view of the process, I need to almost divorce myself of that and just like zoom in on like the day to day, the week to week. And it became, I work towards like that. I created an author mission statement was I work towards writing epic fantasy novels by investing. My thing is 5,000 words a week or 10 hours a week on my writing. And if I do that, I get the like, okay, that's the identity now. So check, I got it. Check, I got it. And I picked numbers that were feasible for me. So when I was writing book 2 and 3, because I had that, I was writing closer to 12 to 15K a week. But just by having these little benchmarks, I got like kind of hooked on it. Because who doesn't love the dopamine of checking boxes and like succeeding in what you set out to do? And the converse goes as well. Like conversely, if you have this idea of I write big epic fantasy novels and I'm not finishing any of them, that's pretty demoralizing. So breaking it down into bite-sized chunks that you can build a little momentum, for me, that was really helpful. So for those people who are starting out and trying to figure out like, who am I? What is my role? Try writing an author mission statement. See if that helps you get bite-sized chunks that build up to the big goal that you have.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's an excellent tip. I have never done anything like that before, but I can see how it would be very helpful. I just my writing is just quite different from you. And, you said it was easy for you to go back and know where to add or change things. I'm a very, very heavy discovery writer or pantser. So on the very opposite side of the spectrum, it is very frequent for me to come back and read something and completely forgot. Oh, I don't even remember writing this. So in fact, I have a writers group right now. We're going through one of my epic fantasies. This thing, it's like 169,000 words or something. And I'm constantly surprised because I don't have time before I send it to the reading group to come back and read it. Instead, they'll come and be like, oh, when this happened, this happened. I was like, I don't even remember that. I'm like, that's cool. Like, great, good for me that happened. So it's funny. And I think, but for me, the drafting, I love drafting so much. It's so fun. I love just the writing it out long form. This is why my books end up longer, because I just add so much stuff into it. And the details are easier to remember in the writing moment. But yeah, post, it's kind of like done, out of mind, next story. So it's just funny how different everyone can be successful, wherever you are.
Yeah.
So
I think it's really cool though that like and this is why, right? Like you find like co-authors coming together who enjoy different parts of it. I said all the time in my writing group, I'd be like, I would love you come to me with an idea, I help flesh out the idea, and then you write it, and I never want to. I don't want to see it again until it's a finished product. I would love that level of like not having to draft. But now that I've done it a couple times, it's like the drafting isn't as like overwhelming or isn't as scary, and I'm finding more joy in it. Do you find yourself like I mean, how many books do you have in your not discography, your biblio? Like how many books are on your backlist at this point?
Who publish, or including published and non-published stuff?
Yeah, both.
Both. So I published 5. I have 3 that will be published in a couple of weeks. And then I have 2 fully written that I'm too afraid to edit. So I've just started writing another. So I'm about a third of the way through another book. So there's always a lot going on. But when I find myself in the editing stage for way too long, it frustrates me. I get really antsy. I get kind of grumpy because I need to create something. So, it would be nice to say, okay, I'll work with someone who loves editing. Great. I'll draft this thing and just hand it off and say, okay, have fun. Let me know when it's
here's my
published.
vision for it. Here's my vision for it. Follow through. I'll see it on my,
but
put it on my shelf when it's done.
We can learn to like, I've appreciated the editing process a little bit more. I think a lot of my frustration with it comes to my lack of organization. So it's hard to discipline myself to, or I do reverse outlines, after I've written it. That helps. I'll go through chapter by chapter and then write, okay, this is what happened, this is where we ended up, and just make sure everything kind of aligns together. But I can't pre-plot. It stunts my creativity. So
Yeah, yeah. But like, so even
interesting.
with the reverse plotting though, that like, has that helped your editing process, or is it
Yeah,
kind
a
of
little
like I
bit.
still hate it?
No, I mean, I generally reverse plot it and don't identify any problems with it, if that makes
Mhm.
sense. And so,
Yeah, of
not that
course.
there aren't problems, a development or editor can get it, be like, oh, actually, there's this, this, and this. I actually don't generally have a lot of problems with story, interestingly. So I'm curious to pick your brain on this, because it seems like you were able to workshop your story and make it more tight. Where I struggle is the actual like phrasing and word usage, because I will write things all the time that make absolute sense to me, and the editor's like, I'm confused. And it's like, I'm confused how you're confused, because it makes sense to me. So that's the tricky part. I don't generally have developmental problems with my stories, which is kind of
Mm,
interesting. So
yeah. So like in terms of when you say you want to pick, in terms of the, like you're saying you understand, like when you free, you discovery right, like story is ingrained in us. Like for the most part, you consume enough of it, you start recognizing, the parts of it that are important and the
mhm.
parts of it that are kind of superfluous. Um, and I think like Stephen King's a perfect example, right? Like Stephen King, is a discovery writer, a pantser, but he understands story to the point that he knows how to hook you and keep you hooked, and satisfy like the genre conventions that of the stories he's writing. So when we look at story structure, for the biggest thing is you're setting a subliminal promise within the first 10% that you're going to deliver on in the last 10%.
Mhm.
Give or take, doesn't have to be 10, but for the most part, those are like the benchmarks. Um, if you have like a more episodically structured story where it kind of goes from, like, I'll give an example. I'll use the Poppy War. I'm not finished it. I'm reading the Poppy War for the first time now. My wife and I are buddy reading it.
Nice.
Um, and yeah, it's been super cool. Like, because the way I read and consume stories is so different from the way she does. So when we talk about it, it's really interesting. But the novel is paced and structured in a very episodic way, where almost each chapter has its overarching thing, and then it starts a new one. So it almost like reads more like a TV show,
Interesting.
where, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, where the overarching plot exists, it's there, but it's not, like the subliminal messaging of what's going to happen is very, very deeply rooted if it's there. And the reason why I say I don't know is because I haven't finished it to like backfill and go, this is what they were saying, and here's where it was really talking about. So it's almost like we'll see. Um, but I think when you get into the meta details of your story, like, well, this was the inciting incident, and like that doesn't work for some people. Like they cannot see that in their own story, and I do think it's harder to see it in your own than it is to see it in other works.
True.
um you almost have to, like, if you want to engage with that muscle, you have to do it elsewhere first and then take it and apply it to your own. So looking at, well, what are your favorite stories? What did you love about those stories? What inspired you? What stays with you about those stories? And you'll find that they generally have things that resonate for you, and then you end up recreating them in some way, shape, or form. So we are, like, that's just how the human brain works. It's very efficient to take something we understand and add to it than it is to build it from scratch.
True.
So I think like what are some of your favorites that have like have a special place in your heart that stick with you even though you haven't read it in 20 years? You know what I mean?
In terms of books that I've read,
Books, movies, any type of
ah,
story.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of movies. I haven't watched movies in a long time. Ever since my wife's not a huge movie person, and since we had kids and got in the homestead, there's just not a lot of time for that. But books
Sure.
wise, I mean, obviously, some of my favorite books are clearly by Brandon Sanderson. I do like the Mistborn series, the first half. Second half is okay. I didn't love it as much, but I really do like books by Tamara Pierce. They're
Hmm.
kids from my child or books from my childhood. I really got sucked into those and enjoyed those. Inkheart, that book from my
Sure.
childhood, still sticks with me. I love it. Um, I'm trying to think of any of the other books. I don't own a lot of books. I read a lot of books as a kid. I do like to reread when I remember them, but those are the
Mm,
ones that come to mind. What are some of
sure.
the favorite books you've read that stuck with you?
Mistborn, especially that the first era, that will always have a special place in my heart. It's one of those stories I will never stop recommending.
Hmm.
Um,
Agreed.
and even Brandon Sanderson, he's the first to say like these stories are flawed. They have issues. I was trying to write to, you know, what was trending, and what was trending at the time in fantasy was the grim, dark
Hmm.
Game of Thrones aftermath, and um, you can tell like in his writing since the tonality has certainly changed and become more his
Yeah.
own, especially with like Stormlight. So it's but when you look at the elements like of Mistborn, there are so many ornaments. So I like to describe it as like a Christmas tree.
Hmm.
So we have a tree. The tree is the foundation, and you can dress it up kind of however you want. So it's not because the sky is red and ash rains from the sky. That's not why people love this story. Is it part of it? Sure. Is it that people ingest metals? No. Is it that it's the way the characters engage with the world? It
Hmm.
is the magic system for sure, but even the magic system to a degree is ornamental. It just so happens that the ornament fits the tree so well,
Hmm.
like the size, shape, color, angle at which it's at, spacing, everything about it really just works. And that's the case with a lot of his work, that the character, the world building, the themes, that you can't take one and extrapolate it. You can't take one, excise it, and then extrapolate out. Like they are greater than the sum of their parts. But from
Hmm.
a structural standpoint, um, book one is a heist. It follows the same archetypical heist line as any other, but why do we love it more than any other heist? It's all the ornaments coming together and fitting in a cathartic way.
Hmm.
And then the ending, people, I know people who hate the ending. Um, I think the ending is the most beautiful thing I've ever read. And it slapped me like
Hmm.
once, you know what I mean? Um, but yeah, I definitely think Mistborn's one that will always stick with me. Of late, the Red Rising series has been uh, a favorite of mine. I've reread it. I reread it earlier this year, ahead of the sixth book that just came out in July. Um, those stories always resonated with me and were big inspirations into the writing of my book, just in terms of because my book is very heavily influenced by the Spartacus's rebellion from Rome.
Sure.
So Red Rising has a very similar type of we are going to fight for the oppressed, and
Hmm.
that those types of themes always really resonate with me. It has nothing to do with story structure. It's just that thematically there's something in story that we kind of gravitate onto, we hook onto it, and then we impart it into our own work. And I think if you like, Tamora Pierce also has very, like, her novels are like very tight in terms of like there's nothing wasted. There's no page space that like, oh, we didn't really need that. So when you read and you consume stories like that, you're less likely to write ones that have superfluous detail of like, you know, this random subplot that never gets folded back into the mix. You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
you consume it in such a way that you recreate it in such a way. And I think that even if you don't have the meta details, you don't know what to call a certain thing, because you consume it, you understand it
Mm-hmm.
here, even if you can't express it out here, you know?
Yep. Absolutely. Well, I definitely agree with all that you're saying. I think that really comes down to the intuition piece of it, whether you're a plotter or a discovery writer, right? There's, the inputs that you have from stories, books, movies, TV shows that you've been ingesting. I know what my preference is. I know what types of books keep my interest. And so those are the types of books I write, the ones that keep my interest. But it is interesting, right? To hear a kind of an analysis of some of these more famous books, because I think there's a lot of authors that maybe overthink it. As authors, because we have a lot of times with our heads, in your case, you've been working on the series for 10 years, there's lots of potential to overthink things, right? I mean, it's not, I'm not saying that happened, but there's a potential for it. I think there's a lot of people that work on their books for so long, 3 5 years, and they just keep changing things that there's multiple good ways. It's like, they were both good. You didn't have to keep changing it. It was already good, and you just change it from one good to another good. I think authors need to accept that and stop.
Stop. Yes. And you even use the same words I use with my writing group, with my coaching. Like, don't replace good with good.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it's fresh for you doesn't mean, like, you think it's better because it's new,
Mm-hmm.
but you've been working on it for X amount of time. A
Yep.
reader coming in blind might even choose that first one
Mm-hmm.
over this new one. So I couldn't agree more. There is a danger of tinkering,
Mm-hmm.
and when you convince yourself that something's wrong with your story, but you don't know what it is, that's where, like, you're going to do, treat it like a doctor. Imagine if you went, doctor, I'm hurt, and he just went, well, let's cut you open, let's figure out what's going on. That's not how it works.
Mm-mm. Mm-mm.
That would be terrible, but that's how a lot of newbie writers apply their editing phase. My story isn't working, so I don't know what's wrong, I just need to fix all of it, and that's not the answer.
Mm-hmm.
um very often, that's where developmental editors can be so impactful, of being like, this is what's working, this is what's not jiving, this is what's not working. Because, like, but they're not all created equally, like in anything,
Right.
right? So it's finding someone who shares your artistic vision for your project, because you can have someone who, like, they're very talented, they're highly you know recommended, they have all these accolades, but if you don't share the same creative vision, you might be replacing good with bad, because
Right.
it's not true to you and what you want to tell.
Well, and genre
But yeah, I
alignment.
definitely say
So
again.
make sure in genre alignment as well. I don't mean to interrupt, because I know there's a bunch of people that found developmental editors that don't read in the same genre. So it's just like, well,
Yeah,
that's not helpful. You need a developmental
that's
editor that knows the genre you're writing in. Otherwise, it's just going to be off base.
I'd
So
almost say, like, it's even better if they are specifically in your genre.
if you can,
Especially
yeah.
if you, yeah, if you write, like, if you write fantasy, you want someone who reads fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want someone who's used to reading, like, the only thing they read is thrillers and mysteries, because they're going to say your pacing is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Because by the way they've consumed stories, it is, it's wrong.
It's true.
But that
Yeah.
doesn't make it wrong. If anything, you will not meet the genre conventions of the people who actually want your story.
Right.
So yeah, finding someone who shares your artistic vision is not easy, um, but it's so important, and it's even an editorial assessment, not like by a developmental editor. It's just like, what are the takeaways that you're getting from this manuscript, to, like, get a little bit of an idea of, well, what's not working. You wouldn't go, I have, once again, using my arm hurts, well, let's chop it off and inspect it and see what's wrong with it. That would be a really inefficient way of going about it. So assess, address, apply.
Mm-hmm.
Assess what's wrong with it, address what's wrong with it, integrate it back in, iron out the wrinkles and the ripple effects. So that's a skill in and of itself.
Absolutely. I love taking all of these things because I think there's a lot of things that, like I said, newer authors have never considered. Um, because I remember being in that phase, a new author, you just have this story. And I loved how earlier you said I finished my book and I was like, now what? I had the now what phase for an entire year. I didn't I My wife is like, you've sat on that book for a year. Are you gonna do anything with it? I was like, because I probably should. I just don't know what to do with it. So hearing this conversation, I hope, is enlightening and encouraging to newer authors to know that, you don't have to sit on something. There are actions you can take, but you also don't have to overdo it. At some point, I'm just gonna use this as an example because I actually co-authored. So you talking about co-authoring, it's a fun experience, by the way. I absolutely recommend it. It was a blast. But we have 3 middle grade books that are coming out at the end of this month that we co-authored. And I was talking to my co-author last week, and she was just like, "Do you think we need another round of edits?" And I was just like, "No." Because it's hard, it's good enough. Like we've had a few editors look at it, and it's to the point where I think it's excellent. Now, if you send it to a different editor, they're always going to find something because every editor is different, right?
That's their job too.
That's their
Like,
job.
imagine
Yeah.
if you sent it to a new editor and they came back with nothing, you'd be like, "Can I have my money back then?" Like, you
Right.
know what I mean?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
They're gonna find something wrong with it.
And so we are just like, no, it's time. This is a fun story, and middle grade readers are gonna love it. The mistakes have been weeded out. We just need like a final copy edit, but developmentally wise, line edit wise, it's in a good place. So you just have to make that decision, and it's hard. But once you do, then you can move on and write something else, which
Yeah.
is so fun.
But that
So
you it is hard because I also think like we're creatives. We want the pat on the back. We want
right,
that like stamp of approval. And this was something that I personally definitely struggled with where it was like, okay, I did what you said. Is it good now? I did what you said. Is it good now? And of course, like you're saying, the same editor came back and was like, well, you could do this. Like you just get under a tighter and tighter microscope.
yeah,
Yeah, you're going to find stuff and you could go back and forth in this process at nauseum for infinity. You can
forever,
just keep
yeah,
going. You know what I mean? Because once again, we create. We're going to keep creating, even if it's just go fix this little thing. But it's like, oh well, if I'm fixing this, what if I do this? Once you engage that part of your
yep,
brain, you're opening up a can of worms.
true,
So I think it takes a maturity and a maturity and a faith in your own stewardship, like in your own discernment that like, nope, this is not like more is not better for this story. Like that takes experience to know how best to steward your baby because at that point it's a baby.
mm-hmm. It's true.
You have to take care of it.
Yep, absolutely. And I don't know, I love this part of the conversation because I think this is where a lot of people are stopped up. Coincidentally, part of how I got into writing was there was an author who had been working on a coworker of mine had been working on her book for 8 years. And she challenged me, hey, sit down and just write something. It's like, all right, cool. So I just sat down and wrote something that ended up being the prologue of my trilogy. Well, I ended up publishing 3 books before she even published her first. And we were talking about it, and she was just like, what happened? Like, you were too afraid to get started writing, and I'd been working on this book forever. And it really came down to this. It really came down to overthinking, overdoing it. Because I read her book and I was like, this is awesome. I would publish this tomorrow. But then she continued to work on it for like another year and a half, 2 years, because there were just more problems. It's like, I don't really think there were. I think it was good. It was excellent the way it was. So have
And that's the
confidence.
other thing. I think like there's a degree your favorite stories. Once again, we talked about Mistborn, a shared love for Mistborn. Brandon Sanderson will say it's not perfect. It's not even near it. There are things I wish I would have done differently had I gone back. So many people, it changed their lives. It impacted them in such powerful ways.
Mm-hmm.
I think to a degree, you wanting to keep it for yourself and continue tinkering on it, at what point does it become selfish?
That's true. No, it's true.
And I
You
can say
know,
that from my own experience. Like I was like, I'm just being selfish at this point.
part of the reason I stopped was because of my intense dislike for editing. That's what ultimately they're just like, I can't do this anymore. But I think I just want to point something out to someone who's listening, who might be working on something and they're doubting or whatever. You have to remember that your readers are not always writers, and they're usually not reading with a writer's brain. Now that is relevant because when it's your book, it's almost impossible to read it from a reader's brain because you are the writer, you have the power to edit it. And so, this is part of the reason I love writing first drafts and then leaving them for 6 to 8 months because I just forget. I literally forget about everything. I come back and I'm forced to read it as a reader because I don't remember what's
Sure.
happening. And it feels good. Be like, oh, wow, this is interesting. I'm discovering things. I'm remembering things that I did. And so if you don't space yourself from it, you have to accept that you're the writer, you're not the reader. Your readers aren't going to notice these problems. It may not be for everybody. Everyone has their own preferences, but that's okay. The readers who love your book aren't going to notice any problems. I don't see any problems in Mistborn. I read it every time. I've reread it multiple times and I've never noticed any problems with it. I just
Yeah.
like it. So
Yep.
it's kind of funny. So it's just about perspective and everything. So in any case,
It's
so your next books, I want to jump back to your books. Your first book came out in June, correct? The next one you're getting proofs for, which means publishing sometime this month or December. Is that when we can expect it?
so even though this is where things got a little wonky. So even though it was, this is like a well kept secret. Even though it was uploaded to Amazon back in June, the original launch date was supposed to be August 8th.
Okay.
Then like it was up just so we could get the proofs, make sure everything was good.
Yeah.
Then August 8th, as it was getting near, I was like, I actually want to do more because once again, this is me, perfectionist and tinkering. But I was just doing it on not on the book was done, but I was doing it on, I want to reach out to, I want to do some more like PR stuff. I want to create a press kit. I want to reach out to some different outlets, and I need a little time to do those sorts of things. I want to make like a book box. I want to,
Yeah.
So then it ended up getting pushed until just the other week. So October 24th, we did like the big launch. So October 24th was the date in my head that of when the book came out, because that's when I started telling people, hey, it's out. But yeah, so the book 2 is scheduled for I want to say it's January 23rd. It's whatever that Tuesday is.
Got it.
And then book 3 will come out April 16th to like around mid to late April.
Perfect. Now I'm glad you explained that because I was looking at things. I swear he just launched this at the end of October, but Amazon is saying June. I was like, huh, that's
Yeah.
interesting. I don't think it was June, but could be crazy. So
Yeah.
funny,
It
funny
wasn't
things like
June.
that. It's no
It's
big
just
deal.
that's when, yeah. So, and it doesn't let you, one of the
Perks.
many things with Amazon, you abide by their rules
Absolutely.
in all ways. So
Mhm.
that's what it says.
Yep, I know exactly how that is, all the fun aspects of it. But I think that's awesome. I haven't had a chance to read your book yet. I've seen it. It's on my massive TBR that eventually I'll read through. But I appreciate you talking through some of these things. It was a really insightful conversation. Before we end here, I always love to ask, where can people find more information about you and your books?
So on TikTok, that's where I'm most like if you want to engage with me, that's the best place to find me. I do have an Instagram. I barely know how to use it. But I'm I'm trying. It's just another thing I have to learn. But I have my website, timfacciola.com. That has you know, all my projects will be there. Getting in touch with me, whether it's I have a couple different avenues for people, whether so if it's you want to get into writing, I have a course and a Discord server where we create a community where people can kind of learn storycraft and write together. It is fantasy and sci-fi specific. That's the only caveat.
Hmm.
Um, that is First Torch Books. If you search First Torch Books, that's my publishing company. That's where you can find information about that. And then my fitness side of things, I have what's called gladiator training, which
Nice.
is
Okay.
based on the book, kind of sort of. So that's like, fine. You can reach out to me anyway in which, and I'll teach you how to swing swords and maces and clubs and all sorts of fun stuff that'll probably get weird looks from you in public.
All the right things, then, of course. I mean, that's what we're here for. Come to accept my nerdiness, geekiness, whatever you want to call it. Um, love it. I love every piece of it. The last thing I will say is you do fantasy authoring coaching as well. Is that correct
Yes.
for First Torch? So there's on the links that you provided. I'll make sure they're in the show notes. So if you're interested in coaching, Tim does coaching. So yeah, I think that's excellent. An excellent thing to point out in case anybody's looking for that. So, well, thanks again for your time. This has been an amazing conversation.
Thank you, Dan. My pleasure. This was great.
I hope you found that insightful and interesting. Tim is a very positive person. I appreciate the perspective and insight that he had or that he brought of his experience in writing this story for so long. There's definitely lots of pros and cons to have writing a story for so long. I don't know that I could do it. I think my inability to focus on something for a long period of time would prevent me from writing a story for that long. Still, I commend him. I haven't had a chance to read his book, but I definitely want to. It looks incredible, and I know that I would enjoy it. It's right up the alley of the types of books I would like to read. So I will be diving into that at some point. Next week, we'll be talking to Jill Scheuer about her book, How to Handle Tough Conversations. We talk a lot about the nonfiction publishing learning curve. So this is her first book that she's published. We talk a lot about the challenges with writing nonfiction, organizing nonfiction, and getting everything put together. And then, of course, marketing that. Now, I don't have a lot of nonfiction writing experience, exactly zero, to be frank. But hearing her perspective on getting into the nonfiction writing game is very insightful. And it's helpful for those of us who maybe have ideas around nonfiction. If you're one of these people who are thinking, I think I have some ideas for nonfiction stories, or not stories, nonfiction ideals, or I guess helpful information, this might be a really good interview for you to listen to because Jill is very positive. She talks a lot about that experience, and there's some really great ideas that I even took from it for my fiction writing business. And in case you want to tune into that next week, of course, if you like this podcast, like and share it with your friends and family, other authors who are looking for positivity. If you'd like to join me on the podcast, you can head to thecasualauthor.com. There you can fill out the pitch form or just email me directly at dkenner at, excuse me, that is the wrong email address. This is what you get for having so many different emails. Author dkenner@gmail.com. I almost give you my work email address, which you're welcome to email me at that as well. More than likely, I'll just get mixed in with the thousands of other emails I get, and you won't get what you're looking for. So, author dkenner@gmail.com is your best bet. Regardless, thank you again for joining me today, and I look forward to talking to you next week. Bye.